Okay, so this year I read 100 books, and I've not read 100 books, I don't think ever. Maybe when I was in like year two, perhaps, when I was reading books that were like this long and they were like 4 pages, but I've literally never read that ever again. So this is the first year in a very long time. I will preface this with saying I was unemployed for a lot of it, so that kind of is the reason why I was able to read so much. Plus, when I was employed, I was working at a library, so what can I say? It was an environment conducive to reading. Particularly great reading year, even though I read a lot, which was honestly kind of sad because I'm like, I tried my best to read as much as I could. I don't know if that was like the best way to go about this because it meant that I read a lot of things I didn't like, partly because there was a 2 to 3 month span where I was reading books for some videos I wanted to make just to kind of see what I wanted to do with this channel and see what kind of things I liked making. And that was to read books by celebrities. You know, a lot of people were doing that. So I was like, let me do that too. Specifically with some people that perhaps wouldn't be chosen to do these videos. Like I did Sofia Coppola, which I don't think anyone's ever done. Or I did Jeremy Strong, which I don't think anyone's ever done. So a lot of the books this year, honestly, I had a bigger issue with them being disappointing rather than them being bad. Like even a lot of the books on this list, they're not really bad, they just weren't either what I was expecting or just like they just didn't have what I thought they were gonna have. Because a lot of these are other people's favorite books and therefore they're not books I chose at my own volition to read. Like a lot of the issue in some of these is just that they weren't for me. The first one is a Jeremy Strong book, which is A Death in the Family. So this is a part of a collection of stories where the author retells his life stories, but it's memoir, but it's not really, it's really long and it's telling each part of his life in lots and lots of detail. So there'll be like one story about how he went out on New Year's Eve, but it'll be like a long section of the book and it would be like how he got permission to go to the party, how he got the alcohol that he needed for the party, how he got the invitation to the party, what the party was like when he got there, what the party became, how the party ended. Like it would be like everything possibly could have happened at this event was described. So it's described as like Proustian because this is the same thing as like The Swan's Way. Like that's also on Jeremy Strong's like best list. So you can kind of tell what he's like. But this book, which wasn't for me, was really long and too much detail about some things that were just really mundane. And I didn't think they had anything specifically profound that I liked. Like I didn't think the writing was anything super beautiful. It could be because obviously I'm reading it in English. This book is Norwegian, so maybe the writing was just more unique, but this is a pretty like famous book in English as well, so I just don't think this was me. Number 9 is The House of Mirth. So this is something I read for my Mindy Kaling video, and this was something I was expecting to kind of like. It really depended, but this was a classic I didn't like. This book kind of embodies the type of classic that usually people don't like, right? And that is because a lot of it is really boring and mundane without having anything to really infer within the pages. So the main character is somebody who is old and unmarried, and that's, you know, a big issue, and obviously we see that in other stories, but it's essentially the things that can happen to you in a negative way. So you know how like in Pride and Prejudice, Charlotte Lucas is somebody who kind of escapes that bad life by marrying Mr. Collins, and this is basically somebody who isn't able to find a marriageable partner, who's been too picky, who's taken too much of her time, and is essentially kind of being punished for it. Like society will not allow that. So it's a tragedy where more and more horrible things keep happening to her. I do not want to say that this had nothing to say. I think the author is very prolific for writing this kind of story where it's kind of just tragic in many, many ways, and that is for other people, and it just wasn't for me. I didn't like any of the characters, I didn't really like any of these conversations they were having, which is a big part of a story like this, where you're meant to be kind of understanding the characteristics of each person and the interpersonal world of this rich upper class society, and I just didn't care too much about it. So I don't think that I liked it very much because of that, and not because it was like a bad book or badly written or badly structured even. I just think this wasn't for me. And the next one is To the Lighthouse. Again, another problem with this is just like I read a lot of books that weren't for me. This book is very introspective. We spent so much time in people's heads looking at small, mundane things, and I just don't think that was incredibly important to the way that the story came about. Like, I don't know if I need to know this character in as much detail, considering that wasn't the message of the story. Like, sometimes we would spend ages like looking out of a window and describing the details of the scenery around us, and that was fine in some parts of the book where the scenery was adding to the narrative of the story. Like, we were going through a hard time, we were looking out at the ocean, and those descriptions were very fascinating in creating a tone, whereas I don't think they were great in the beginning parts of the story, where I wanted more to actually happen and I wanted more people to be interacting with each other so that we could see a dynamic form, and I don't think that was happening as much. And big part of that, and obviously Virginia Woolf wrote this, and that's her style, to be very detailed on these small things and be talking about like what's happening inside someone's head. I didn't really like Mrs. Dalloway either, so I just don't think Virginia Woolf's writing style is for me, and that's a big issue that I had here. Number 7 is These Violent Delights. I've talked about this book quite a lot in why I don't like it, and a big reason is just that the characterization of these 17-year-olds just doesn't make any sense. YA has a big problem with this. They need to solve this, where if a character is 17, they're allowed to have responsibilities and they're allowed to feel like suffocated by them. However, they do need to make sense for someone's situation and age. So if it's like they're going to get married, why do they need to get married? You need to actually set out the plot for us. Plus, I do think the politics of this book were kind of deranged, and the action wasn't very exciting because the characters didn't make any sense. Like, why would they be in this situation? I just feel like this needed more tightening up. It had like a real sheen of glamour around it. There was some very heavy tropes in this where people really like these tropes, right? It's mafia, it's Romeo and Juliet. People love these things. And it just wasn't executed in a way that really came through with what we went in for, because of the fact that these characters are YA characters, they're written as YA, and they're given just too much responsibility. I just wish we were allowed to have YA characters with the right amount of responsibility that makes sense, because that can happen. If you're 17, your world still has a lot going on. You might feel pressure. To be honest, I'm 22 now, and I don't think I've ever felt pressure like I did when I was 17. To this day, doing my maths A-level is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and I think you're allowed to have those heavy, suffocating feelings, even if you're young, and I think more authors need to take that on board. You don't need to be at like your wit's end, like your life is going to end, for there to be high stakes for a young character. Number 6, again, back to this nonsense where it's like not for me. I think Spring Snow is really well written, it's well structured, but the same thing keeps happening. We get this one character who is very sort of naive, ignorant, and just indecisive. And he is so bloody annoying that he keeps going through the same motions again and again with the story, which might be like fun for somebody else who likes that stark look at life where you're going through society and class and seeing the way that that impacts an individual's life and how class can be so violent emotionally instead of just physically. So there were many things in this book that were very interesting. I just felt a little tired reading this because it felt super repetitive. However, this was a book that I picked up by myself, but I also read this for my Sofia Coppola video. So I already had this on my TBR, which is why I picked it. I don't know, like it just wasn't for me. I just thought it was going to be a little bit more exciting, and it just wasn't. And for other people, I think that's fine, but for me, it wasn't. Plus, I wanted to read a Mishima book, who's the author for the book, and he is kind of nuts, and I just wanted to see what his like thoughts and opinions in book form were, because that's kind of what he's famous for, plus being a fascist. So fascist literature, my first foray into that. Number 5 is The Traitor Baru Cormorant. This is a book I read kind of recently, and I had a lot of opinions on it. I've talked about it in a recent video, and a big thing about this was just that I had a lot of high expectations for this book, because this is about a woman going into the ranks of an oppressive government and trying to sort of take it down. I didn't really think that I needed sci-fi to have a lot of action. Sci-fi isn't about action, it's science fiction. It can just be about a world, right? It doesn't have to be action or violent or anything like that. However, I felt really bored in this book because so much of the revolutionary action that was happening in this was to do with finances, which is really interesting on paper because, you know, like that's something we don't really get a lot. We don't get a lot of financial decisions because those are really important for a revolution. I can understand that, but I just don't think this was well done. There was a lot of telling and not showing, like, why is this an oppressive government? Like, really, like, actually show us. They were saying like they were erasing cultures of the people around them and making them more homogenous. Makes sense, the British did that, right? But they weren't showing us. We were just meant to feel empathetic to these characters because we know that erasing someone's culture is a bad thing. We weren't meant to take that on because of the world building that the author actually did. A lot of people really like this book, and I can understand why. It was very different and unique. However, I didn't like the fact that we were being told a lot. I wanted to see more. I wanted to see how things were playing out. We were really skipping through a lot of stages as well. Like, we weren't staying in one time frame for a long time to sort of see things progress. We were just like, okay, and this happened and this happened, and then we've got to go and do this. It felt a little rushed in a way that, you know, made for more telling than showing. I think something that I want to compare this to is perhaps the show Andor, if you've seen that. It's a Star Wars show, and that really goes into detail on why the governments are oppressive, right? In all the other Star Wars projects, you are told the First Order is like oppressive and regressive in many, many ways, but you don't see it in such detail in a way that's so viscerally violent until we see Andor. And that is kind of what I wanted to see in this book. I thought we were going to see it because obviously this character is within the ranks of an oppressive regime, and that just never comes. I just feel like we gloss over that, as I said before, so wasn't for me. I just want more world building that actually makes sense and one that makes me invigorated. Like, I want to feel the oppression so that we feel like we need to, like, you know, kill off this enemy because they're such horrible people, but it's like, why? Tell me why. I understand that I can figure out why by myself, but that's not interesting to read. I would read the newspaper if I wanted to just see oppression, you know? Number 4 is Kismet. So I also read this for my Vindicating video. This book was really bad. This book was really boring and dull and badly written. Like, this was one of those books where I was like, this is not me, this is the book. Like, this is the book's prol. I think this was part of, like, her imprint. Like, I think this is a book that Vindicating, like, published, part of her, like, publishing endeavors. It was not good. So the main character is South Asian, and I guess that's a big reason why she liked this book, but it was just really boring. I think the wellness community does have a lot of weird shit going on, and I think a book that probably does this better is Rouge by Mona Awad. I've not read that yet, but I've heard a lot of good rave reviews, and I think this is trying to do something vaguely similar in its sort of subject matter, but I don't think it does anything. It's a mystery, so it kind of falls into the genre conventions of that, but I just don't really like mystery, and I don't think it's very well done, and nothing is particularly interesting. The one thing I did like about this book was it did call out its main white character as someone who had flaws and who wasn't all, you know, accepting, and, you know, we didn't have to become friends with them at the end, and we didn't have to forgive them. I think that was a really interesting plot point that doesn't really always, like, get to fruition. I think the only other book I've ever seen do that is Babel by R.S. Kwong, and that's a much more political book, and this book is, you know, kind of like a pathetic little mystery book that's just kind of boring. But that having this ending was pretty radical in a way that most books just aren't. Third book is Disorientation. I bitched about this really hard in my What I Read in Autumn video, and I really don't like this book. This book is very bad, and it was really bad because of the narrative voice. It's satirical, so it has that sort of like funny and haughty over-the-top tone, and it just wasn't good here because it made a character who is a PhD student of Chinese American poetry be really numb and blind to racism. And it's like, you can make a lot of characters who are people of color blind to racism, but I feel like a PhD student who specifically studies Chinese American poetry probably shouldn't be the one who's a bit stupid. It feels improbable in a way that's like, I don't want to read this. This is just silly. This isn't interesting. This is stupid. And the main plot of this is handled with much better care in many other books. So I just think that this was unnecessary and kind of like bogged down with stupidity in a way that I don't think many of the other stories that follow this do. The second book is The Last Battle. So I really dislike this book because of how like xenophobic in many, many ways that it is. Okay, so this is the last book in the Chronicles of Narnia, and this book is really racist. Like really, 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 really racist. And I wasn't expecting like Narnia to be racist. So I knew before I got to this book that it was probably gonna have some sort of racism in it, because nearly all of the Narnia books are racist. So this book is really racist though, like loads of different forms of racism. It's very misogynistic. It really pushes its like theistic message. That's not bad. Like obviously you can be Christian. There's nothing wrong with being Christian. It goes really hard for that. So then you really push it, because C.S. Lewis just like is a British man in like the 1950s. He does every form of bigotry otherwise, like to really like hold up his theism, because you know he is a horrible man. Like it was just anti-Semitic and racist and misogynistic and really boring as well. Like this book is about a big battle that happens at the end of Narnia. So basically Narnia is like coming to a close. That's how Narnia ends the entire story. And the themes and the messages in this are just so horrific in a very boring way. A lot of the Narnia books are just very moralistic. Aside from the first one and I think the third one, it's not a narrative story about children going on adventures. That is what it is on the surface, but a lot of it is about this kind of like moralistic upbringing of children. Like this is what children should be like, this is what society should be like. And I just don't think that this one says anything or does anything to save it from being a shit book. It's just bad. It's not even interesting on the surface level by having an adventure, because we don't follow the main characters, the Pensieves and all of the children. We don't follow any of the characters that we know from Narnia the world. We follow these random characters and they get into a war because of cultural differences. And then we do a whole lot of racism, and then it goes sprinkle on top of misogyny, and you're just like, enough. My God, enough. Because his writing is so dry as well. Like that's a big issue with this book, is like he does not have an engaging writing style outside of the first book. And even that I'm like, But that's like definitely the one that has the most prep and like actual narrative storytelling. This one doesn't have anything. This one is really bad. Do not read Narnia. Don't read any of Narnia. My least favourite book of 2023 is The Priory of the Orange Tree. My God, when I tell you I didn't like this book, I cannot explain that. This is the book that made me understand DNFing. If that's not, you know, if that doesn't tell you what it needs to tell you, I can't tell you more. I hated this book. This book was horrifying. This book was so just boring and structured badly, and the characterization was shit, and the development was crap. I hated this book. I don't understand why people like this book. I feel like this book just needed help with structuring. That's it. Like it probably would have been a decent read if they just split it into two, put it into two books, and then did more work around each character in each book. Because it felt like there were arcs that needed to be completed. They were really rushed because it's one book. It's a one long ass book, and it felt stupid because of that. You were like, okay, we did a lot of stuff in the top half and the bottom half of this book, rushing. We were like running through it. We were track stars in that one, because we were in one place in the continent and they would take you to a totally different place in this world, and they would do it really, really quickly, and that was really stupid because we spent so much time like piecing every little thing together in the first half, which was really boring because all the characters were really boring and we just didn't learn anything about the characters, and we were like speed running. Oh God, I hated this book. I really, really didn't like this book. If you want to see me really rave about how much I hate this book, I have a whole video where I spend like 10 minutes talking about how much I dislike this book. I know it's a lot of people's favourite book. I love fantasy, and to hate this book so much really pissed me off, because I was like, wow, I read 800 pages and I didn't even like it. Plus everyone else loves it. I'm like, am I going insane? Am I different? I'm not special. Like, why did I hate this book so much? I know why. I listed it very clearly in my video, but just so dull. Like, thinking back now, I'm just like, wow, I can't believe I read all of it. There was a point probably like 500 pages into that book where I was like, this has got to end. We've got to end this book now. Like, I've read books that are like 1,000 pages long, and if they're good, that's nothing to do with anything. If they're like good, I don't care. I'll read all of it, mate. Like, I read Mistborn in a couple of days. Like, it wasn't that hard for me. However, this book, slog. Just horrible. Just so bad. I didn't really like the audiobook narrator when I tried to do that for a bit. Like, she was good at some voices and then really bad at others, so that was an issue I think I had with the book. Just nothing was really vibing with me. I didn't like any of the main characters. They were all so entitled and annoying. Because of that, any of the writing that was good, because there were like aspects of the writing that I thought were actually interesting, because, you know, she has her merit in some places. It just felt like all of that felt flat for me because I didn't like anything else. I didn't like the pacing or the characters or the tone or like the setting. Just nothing was clicking aside from the writing, and parts of that was really fun because reading good passages of descriptive and enticing work, a lovely experience as someone who reads and as someone who's done a lot of like literary analysis in my life. I just didn't want to keep reading this, and that was a real big issue. And it's a big reason why I put down The Traitor by Ro Cormoran, because by reading this earlier in the year, I got to the point where I was like, I actually really don't want to have to read anything else that I don't like. I want to be able to read things I do like. Like, I'm still putting it in as a book I read because I read most of Ro Cormoran, but like, no, that was a really bad book and that's why I didn't finish it. And this book really made me realize that I need to prioritize what I like more than other things, because I read this really quickly just because I wanted to. I didn't really want to be in this world for very long, but you should read books where you want to stay in them, you want to finish them, you want to be a part of that world. And that's a big part of why reading is so interesting. And to be taken out of that for something that you just think you should be reading because you want to be part of the conversation or like, you know, for a video, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just not worth it. Like, you should read things that you actually like. So those are all of my least favorite books from this year. So looking forward to next year. I just really hope next year is a better year reading wise, because this had a lot of disappointments. It was a lot of, this is okay, this is 3 stars, this was bad, or like, this is kind of long. I'm really wishing I'm going to have more books next year where I'm like really enthusiastic to read and finish them in a good space too. A big part of that I think is going to be DNFing. I think there are some books on here that I perhaps should have DNF'd. Like, I think I should have probably given up on Spring Snow because that was quite a long book and I just didn't really love that book as much as I perhaps should have, considering how long it was and how specific it was in its politics as well. So yeah, tell me any of the books that you really hated, because I like hating on things. If anyone hated some of the books that I hated, or if anyone loved any books that I hated. I know a lot of people love The Priory of the Orange Tree, and me hating that is a very specific opinion that I have, and I'm really strong in it, so I don't mind if anyone wants to say they do love it. So yeah, thank you for watching. Give it a like if you'd like to, subscribe if you've liked the video. I will also probably be doing a best books of the 2023 video as well. We'll see how that one goes. I read 100 books and I probably only liked like 30 of them, which is definitely kind of a devastating miracle. Yeah. Thank you for watching.